The desert air hung thick with the kind of quiet that only comes after rain. It wasn't a storm, just a slow, steady drizzle that had been falling for hours, turning the highway into a long, dark mirror reflecting the occasional headlights of passing trucks. Off the main road, tucked between a faded billboard and a patch of scrubland, sat a small gas station. Its neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering every few seconds like a tired eye blinking against the damp. Inside, behind the counter, a woman stood wiping down the coffee machine. She was 8 months pregnant, and every movement seemed to cost her something. Her back ached from standing since early afternoon, her feet swollen inside her work shoes. Still she moved with care, refilling the creamer, straightening the snack aisle, checking the register. The night shift was hers alone, as it had been most nights that month. She didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't pay the rent or keep the lights on. Outside, a dark sedan rolled in, tires hissing softly on the wet pavement. The driver parked at the far pump, got out, and walked toward the station with his hands in his jacket pockets. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, a worn leather jacket, and jeans that had seen better days. To most people, he was just another traveler stopping for gas on a long drive. No one looked twice. No one recognized him. And that was exactly how he liked it. He pushed the door open, the bell above jingling weakly. The warm air inside smelled of coffee, motor oil, and something faintly sweet, maybe the cinnamon rolls in the warmer. He nodded politely to the woman behind the counter. She offered a tired smile in return, her eyes briefly meeting his before she turned to grab a fresh pot of coffee. He watched her for a moment as she moved, not in a way that felt intrusive, more like someone noticing the weight of another person's day. He saw how she paused to rest a hand on the counter when she thought no one was looking. Saw how she winced slightly when she bent to pick up a dropped receipt. Saw the way her shoulders slumped just a little when the register beeped with another sale, as if even small tasks were becoming mountains. He filled his tank, then came back inside to pay. While he waited, he glanced around. The store was clean, organized, even cheerful in its own humble way. A few local flyers were pinned to a bulletin board. Church events, lost pets, a community baby shower. He noticed a small photo taped near the register, a black and white ultrasound image curled at the edges. He didn't say anything, just filed it away. When it was his turn, he handed over a 20 for gas and a bottle of water. She rang it up quickly, her fingers moving with practiced ease despite her exhaustion. As she handed him his change, he slid a folded bill back across the counter, quietly without fanfare. "Keep the rest," he said, voice low and calm. She looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you," she said, tucking the tip into the small jar labeled "for emergencies." It wasn't much, but it was more than most left. He nodded again, picked up his water, and headed for the door. But just before he stepped outside, he paused, turned slightly, looked at her, not at her pregnancy, not at her uniform, but at her, at the person underneath it all. "You doing okay?" he asked, simple and direct. She hesitated, then gave a small shrug. Getting by, he didn't push, didn't offer advice or empty reassurance, just said, "Take care of yourself," and stepped back out into the rain. The car started with a soft rumble. He pulled away slowly, tires splashing through shallow puddles. In the rearview mirror, the gas station shrank behind him, just a dot of light in the vast, wet darkness. But something about that brief exchange stayed with him. Not because he'd done anything extraordinary, he hadn't, but because he'd seen her. Really seen her. And in a world that often moves too fast to notice, that kind of attention can feel like a lifeline. Back at the station, she finished her shift with a little more energy than before. Maybe it was the tip. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice. Or maybe it was just knowing that for a moment, someone had looked at her and treated her like a human being. Not just an employee, not just a pregnant woman working late, but someone worthy of a quiet, "You doing okay?" She locked up just after midnight. The rain had let up, leaving the air cool and clean. She walked to her old sedan, one hand resting on the curve of her belly. Inside, the baby kicked softly, as if saying good night to the world. She smiled, started the car, and drove home under a sky beginning to clear. Miles away, the traveler kept driving. He didn't stop again that night. Didn't post anything online. Didn't tell a soul. But as he passed through the empty stretches of desert highway, he thought about the woman at the gas station. About how hard it must be to carry new life, while also carrying the weight of everything else. And he made a quiet promise to himself. Not to fix her life, not to swoop in like some hero from a movie, but to see if there was a real, practical way to help. Not for show, not for praise, just because it was the right thing to do. For now, though, the road stretched ahead, dark and open. And somewhere between the silence and the stars, a small act of human decency had taken root. Unseen, uncelebrated, but deeply real. 2 days later, the same sedan rolled back into the gas station just after sunrise. The sky was pale gold, the air dry and cool. The woman was already at work, restocking energy drinks and wiping down the glass doors. She didn't notice the car at first, just another customer maybe. But when the bell above the door chimed, she looked up and recognized him right away. Not because he was famous, she still didn't know who he really was, but because of the way he'd looked at her last time. Like he actually saw her. He came in without saying much. Just a small nod and a quiet morning. He bought a coffee this time, black, and lingered near the counter while she finished arranging a display of snacks. There was no rush in his movements, no sense that he was here for anything other than what he'd come to do. After a moment, he asked, "Do you get breaks during your shift?" She paused, surprised by the question. "I'm supposed to," she said, "but it's just me here most nights. Hard to step away when someone might pull in." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than she'd said. "And things at home? Are they okay?" She hesitated. Most people didn't ask questions like that. They grabbed their coffee, paid, and left. But something about his tone, the lack of pity, the quiet sincerity, made her answer honestly. "It's been tough," she admitted. "My partner left a few months back. I'm trying to save enough to move into a smaller place, but rent's due and the baby's coming soon." Her voice trailed off, not out of shame, but because saying it out loud made it feel heavier. He didn't offer empty words like "it'll all work out" or "stay strong." Instead, he asked, "Is there anything you need right now?" "Not later, right now." She thought about it. "Honestly, just a few days off before the baby comes, but I can't afford to miss a shift." He didn't promise anything, didn't make grand declarations. He just said, "Let me see what I can do." Later that morning, after he'd left again, she wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. But that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from her manager. "Someone covered your next 2 night shifts. You're off. Use the time to rest." She stared at the screen, confused. "Who?" she texted back. "No name," came the reply. Just said it was taken care of. She didn't know what to make of it. But for the first time in weeks, she went home before dark. She put her feet up, drank a glass of water, and let herself nap while the afternoon sun slanted through the window. It wasn't a miracle, just a few quiet hours. But it felt like a gift. Meanwhile, miles away, the man sat in a roadside diner sipping coffee from a chipped mug. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd called many times before. Not for cameras, not for headlines, but for people who needed help and had no one else to turn to. He spoke softly, explaining the situation. A pregnant woman working alone at a gas station, trying to hold everything together. No names, no drama, just facts. The voice on the other end listened, then said, "We can get her connected with temporary housing support and a local midwife. If she's willing. She'll need to agree," he said. "I won't push anything on her." "Of course," the voice replied. "We'll reach out gently. No pressure." He hung up, left a generous tip under his coffee cup, and walked back to his car. There was no fanfare, no sense of accomplishment. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd tried to help in a way that respected her dignity. The next evening, a woman from a local community group stopped by the gas station. She introduced herself as someone who worked with expecting parents facing tough times. She didn't bring paperwork or demands. Just a warm smile and a simple offer. "We might be able to help with a few things. Rent assistance, someone to talk to, maybe even a place to stay if things get too tight. Only if you want." The gas station attendant listened, wary at first. She'd been burned before by promises that sounded too good to be true. But this woman didn't push. She left a card with a phone number and said, "Call anytime. No obligation." That night after her shift, the attendant sat on her couch, the card in her hand. She thought about the stranger who'd asked if she was okay. About the unexpected days off. About how for the first time in months she didn't feel completely alone. She dialed the number. Over the next few days, small things began to shift. A caseworker helped her apply for short-term housing aid. A midwife visited her apartment, bringing pamphlets, a birthing ball, and, most importantly, someone to talk to about her fears and hopes. The gas station owner, hearing she'd be out soon, offered to move her to lighter daytime duties when she returned. "You've earned it," he said gruffly, avoiding eye contact but meaning every word. Back on the road, the man checked in with the nonprofit. She said yes, they told him. She's getting support, and she's doing better. He didn't ask for updates after that. Didn't need to. He knew the best help was the kind that disappeared once it was no longer needed, like a bridge you cross and then leave behind. One afternoon, the attendant took her first real lunch break in months. She sat in the back room eating a sandwich someone had left for her, a regular customer who'd heard she was expecting. Sunlight streamed through the high window. Outside, the desert stretched quiet and wide. For the first time in a long while, she breathed deeply, without the constant knot of worry in her chest. She didn't know his name, didn't know why he'd cared enough to come back. But she knew this. He hadn't treated her like a project or a story. He'd treated her like a person. And that made all the difference. As the days passed, the baby kicked stronger. She started sleeping through the night. She even laughed once, really laughed, at something on the radio while restocking gum. Life wasn't perfect, but it was lighter, and sometimes that's enough. Far away, the man kept driving. He stopped at another gas station, bought another coffee, tipped the attendant. He didn't expect anything in return. He just believed that if you see someone struggling and you have the chance to ease their load, even a little, you should. Not because you're special, but because it's human. And in a world that often forgets that, sometimes the most astonishing thing isn't a grand gesture. It's simply showing up and seeing someone clearly enough to know they matter. No cameras showed up. No headlines screamed about a celebrity's secret act of kindness. The story didn't blow up online. In fact, most people never heard about it at all, and that was exactly how it was meant to be. But in the small town near the highway, something quiet began to shift. It started with the gas station owner. He'd noticed how tired the attendant had been, how she'd pushed through double shifts without complaint. After she mentioned she'd gotten a couple of days off, thanks to someone he didn't know but clearly respected, he started paying closer attention. One morning, he brought in a folding chair and set it behind the counter. "Sit when you can," he said, not looking at her like it was no big deal. "Your feet ain't getting any lighter." Then came the truckers. The same ones who'd stopped for coffee and diesel for years. One of them, a grizzled man with a beard and a dog in the cab of his rig, started leaving a paper bag on the counter every Tuesday. Inside, a thermos of homemade soup, still warm. "My wife makes too much," he'd grunt. "Might as well share." A woman who ran the diner down the road heard through the grapevine that the gas station attendant was expecting and struggling. Without fanfare, she began dropping off meals twice a week. Chicken stew, cornbread, fruit salad in reusable containers. "Just bring 'em back when you can," she'd say, waving off any thanks. At first, the attendant didn't know what to do with all this kindness. She was used to doing everything alone, to swallowing her pride and pushing through. But slowly, she let herself accept it. Not as charity, but as community. As people saying, "We see you. You're one of us." Meanwhile, the man who'd stopped that rainy night was long gone, driving through Arizona under wide-open skies. He didn't check social media, didn't Google the gas station. He trusted that the help he'd quietly arranged was in good hands. Still, he carried the memory of her, the way she'd stood so straight despite the weight she carried, the quiet strength in her eyes. He'd made a call to the nonprofit again just once, a week after his last visit. "How's she doing?" he asked. "She's connected with the midwife," came the reply. "She's sleeping better. And the housing aid came through just enough to keep her stable until the baby comes." "Good," he said. And that was it. He didn't need more. He wasn't in it for updates or gratitude. He'd done what felt right and stepped back, leaving room for real support to grow, not from him, but from the people around her. Back in town, the attendant began attending a free prenatal class at the community center. It was held in a small room with folding chairs and posters about breathing techniques and newborn care. At first, she sat in the back, arms crossed, unsure if she belonged. But the instructor, a warm woman with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted her like an old friend. "You're doing great," she said during a break. "Just showing up is half the battle." Other expecting parents were there too, some young, some older, some alone like her, some with partners holding their hands. No one asked prying questions. No one judged. They shared snacks, swapped stories about back pain and weird cravings, and laughed about how nothing ever goes exactly as planned. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt like part of something. One evening after class, she walked to her car and found a small package on the passenger seat. No note, just a soft cotton onesie folded neatly in a gentle blue. She held it to her chest and cried, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sense that someone, somewhere, was rooting for her. She never found out who left it. Maybe it was the diner owner. Maybe it was the nonprofit. Maybe it was him. It didn't matter. What mattered was the message it carried. You're not invisible. At the gas station, things kept changing in small, meaningful ways. A coworker offered to cover her Friday shift so she could rest. Another brought in a pregnancy pillow she'd used with her own kids. Even the regulars started asking how she was feeling. Not out of pity, but genuine care. One night, as she locked up, she looked out at the empty highway and thought about how strange it was. That one moment, one person stopping to really look, could start a chain reaction. Not because he was famous. Not because he gave her a fortune. But because he treated her like a human being worth noticing. And that, more than anything, had reminded others to do the same. Weeks passed. Her belly grew heavier. The baby kicked with more purpose, as if practicing for the world outside. She started dreaming again. Not just about survival, but about the future. Maybe she'd go back to school. Maybe she'd find work at the community center. Maybe she'd even help other women one day, the way people were helping her now. She didn't know how it would all turn out, but she knew she wasn't walking the path alone anymore. Far away, the man sat on a motel balcony at dusk, watching the sun sink behind red rock cliffs. He sipped tea from a paper cup and thought about nothing in particular. His phone buzzed, a message from a friend checking in. He smiled, typed a quick reply, and set it down. He didn't think of himself as someone who changed lives. He just believed in paying attention, in doing what you can when you can without needing applause, and somewhere, in a small town under a wide desert sky, a woman rested her hand on her belly and whispered, "We're going to be okay." Not because a star saved her, but because ordinary people, truckers, diner owners, co-workers, strangers had chosen kindness, and sometimes that's more than enough. The baby came on a cool morning in early spring, just as the desert wildflowers began to bloom. It wasn't dramatic. No storm outside, no last-minute rush through red lights. Just steady contractions, a calm drive to the small regional hospital, and the quiet strength of someone who'd already carried so much. She held her daughter for the first time under soft morning light, filtering through the blinds. The baby was tiny, pink, and perfectly still for a moment before letting out a soft cry that sounded more curious than upset. She counted 10 fingers, 10 toes, traced the curve of her daughter's cheek with a fingertip still trembling from exhaustion and wonder. In that moment, nothing else existed. No overdue bills, no empty apartment, no nights spent wondering how she'd make it through. Just this new life, warm and breathing in her arms. Back at the gas station, word spread quietly. The owner hung a small congratulations sign near the register. The diner owner brought over a casserole and a hand-knitted blanket. The midwife visited the next day not as a professional but as a friend, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding the baby, while the new mother ate her first real meal in days. And then, a few days after she came home, there was a plain envelope in the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a short note written in neat, careful handwriting, wishing you both peace, strength, and many quiet mornings together. You've got this. Tucked behind it was a simple baby carrier, soft, sturdy, the kind that lets you hold your child close while keeping your hands free. No brand name, no flashy packaging. Just something useful chosen with thought. She didn't know for sure who it was from, but she knew, and she didn't need to say thank you out loud. She just folded the note, placed it in the drawer beside her bed, and strapped her daughter into the carrier the next time she needed to walk to the corner store. The baby slept against her chest, warm and safe, as if she'd always belonged there. Recovery wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, moments of doubt, times when the silence of the apartment felt too heavy. But now she wasn't alone in it. The community that had quietly gathered around her during pregnancy didn't disappear after the baby arrived. If anything, they leaned in closer. A neighbor started leaving fresh eggs on her porch. A woman from the prenatal class texted just to check in. "How's the little one? Need anything?" Even the gas station owner called once awkwardly to say her old job would be waiting whenever she was ready, and that they'd make sure the hours worked for her and the baby. Months passed. The baby grew, rolling over, grabbing toes, smiling in her sleep. She began cooing at strangers in the grocery line, reaching for leaves on walks, falling asleep to the hum of the washing machine. Life settled into a new rhythm, messy, unpredictable, full of tiny miracles. One afternoon, while pushing the stroller through the local park, she saw a flyer on a community board. Parent Support Circle, every Thursday 10 a.m. Community Center. Free coffee. All welcome. Something in her chest loosened. She'd been thinking about ways to give back, not with grand gestures, but with what she now understood mattered most. Presence, patience, and the kind of help that doesn't make you feel small. She showed up the next Thursday. At first, she just listened. Other parents talking about sleepless nights, feeding struggles, the loneliness that can come even when you're holding a baby in your arms. Then slowly, she began to share her own story. Not the dramatic version, not the one with a famous stranger swooping in, but the real one. The one about being tired, scared, and overwhelmed, and how a few quiet acts of kindness had reminded her she wasn't invisible. People listened, not because she was special, but because they'd been there too. By summer, she was helping organize the circle, setting up chairs, brewing coffee, welcoming newcomers with the same warmth she'd once received. She never mentioned the man from the gas station, not because it wasn't important, but because the real story wasn't about him. It was about what happened after, about how one moment of being seen had sparked a chain of care that kept going, long after he'd driven away. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, he sat in a quiet cafe in Santa Fe, flipping through a local newsletter someone had left on the table. His eyes landed on a small article near the back. New Parent Support Circle grows at Community Center, started by local mom who knows what it's like to walk this path alone. There was no photo, no mention of gas stations or rainy nights, just a short piece about how the group now served over 20 families, offering everything from baby clothes swaps to late-night text support. He read it twice, then folded the paper gently and tucked it into his bag. He didn't feel pride, didn't think I did that. He knew better. He hadn't built the circle. He hadn't raised the baby. He'd simply done one small thing, asked a question, made a call, stepped back. The rest had been her strength, her community's heart, and the quiet power of people choosing to care. That evening, as he walked back to his car under a sky streaked with orange and purple, he passed a young father struggling to buckle a car seat while holding a crying toddler. Without a word, he stopped, held the door open, and waited. The father looked up, surprised, then grateful. "Thanks," he said. "No problem," he replied, and kept walking. Back home, the new mother rocked her daughter in the fading light. The baby was finally asleep, one tiny hand curled around her finger. Outside, crickets began their evening song. The apartment was still small, still modest, but it felt different now, fuller, not with things, but with possibility. She thought about the note in her drawer, about the baby carrier that had held her daughter through grocery runs, doctor visits, and long walks under desert stars, about the women at the support circle who now called her friend. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd been reminded, when she needed it most, that kindness exists in the everyday. In a question asked, in a shift covered, in a soup left on a counter, and now she was passing it on. Not because someone famous had changed her life, but because someone human had seen her, and that had been enough to help her see herself again. Years later, the gas station still stood at the edge of the highway, though the neon sign had been replaced and the coffee machine upgraded. The desert hadn't changed much. Still wide, still quiet, still holding its secrets in the spaces between the wind and the sagebrush. But inside that small store, something had shifted, not in a flashy way, not in a way that made headlines, but in the kind of quiet, lasting way that real change often happens. A new attendant worked the evening shift now, young, tired, eyes shadowed from too many late nights. She was saving for community college, working doubles to help her family, One rainy night, just like the one years before, a stranger pulled in. He bought a bottle of water, paid in cash, and left a little extra in the tip jar. As he turned to leave, he paused. "You holding up okay?" he asked, voice gentle. She looked up, surprised. Most customers didn't talk, didn't look her in the eye. "Yeah," she said after a beat. "Just tired." He nodded. "Take care of yourself," he said, and stepped back out into the rain. It wasn't the same man from before, but it was the same spirit, the same choice to see someone, really see them, and offer a moment of human connection. And that, more than anything, was the legacy that had taken root. Back in town, the woman who'd once worked that same counter now ran the parent support circle full-time. It had grown, moved to a bigger room, added weekend hours, even started a small lending library of baby gear. She never called it a program, just a place where people could show up as they were without judgment and know they weren't alone. She rarely thought about that rainy night anymore. Not because it wasn't important, but because its meaning had woven itself into the fabric of her life. She didn't tell her daughter the full story, not yet. But sometimes when they walked past the gas station, she'd say, "That place taught me something important." And her daughter, now in elementary school, would ask, "What?" That sometimes when you're having a hard day, someone might notice, and that can change everything. She never knew if the man who'd stopped that night ever heard about the circle, or the families it helped, or the way it had become a quiet anchor in the community, and she didn't need to. What mattered wasn't his name or his fame. It was the simple truth he'd shown her, that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. He, for his part, never spoke of it. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even to close friends. It wasn't secrecy, it was respect. He understood that her story wasn't his to tell. And real help doesn't need a spotlight to be real. Over the years, he kept traveling, kept noticing, kept doing small things when he could. A meal paid for, a ride offered, a call made to someone who could actually help. He never expected anything in return. He just believed that if you have the chance to ease someone's burden even a little, you take it. Not because you're special, because it's what people do for each other. One afternoon, while passing through the same town again, this time for a film shoot an hour away, he stopped by the community center. He didn't go inside, just stood across the street for a moment, watching through the window. He saw her there, laughing with a group of parents holding a baby someone else had brought, handing out diapers from a donated box. She looked tired, yes, but also steady, grounded, like someone who'd been through fire and come out not unscathed, but stronger. He didn't wave, didn't knock. He just turned and walked back to his car. But as he drove away, he felt something quiet settle in his chest. Not pride, not satisfaction, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you played a small part in something good, and then let it grow on its own. Life, after all, isn't about grand rescues. It's about showing up, listening, offering what you can without taking credit, and trusting that even the smallest act can ripple outward in ways you'll never see. Back at the gas station, the new attendant finished her shift. She locked the door, walked to her car, and found a paper bag on the passenger seat. Inside, a thermos of soup still warm and a note that read, "You've got this." She didn't know who left it, but she smiled anyway. And as she drove home under a sky full of stars, she felt a little less alone. That's how it goes. Not with fanfare, not with viral videos or tearful reunions, but with one person choosing to care and another choosing to pass it on, over and over, like seeds carried on the wind, taking root in the most unexpected places. The desert doesn't shout. It endures. And so do the people who live in it, quiet, resilient, connected by invisible threads of kindness that don't need to be seen to matter. And maybe that's the most astonishing thing of all. Not that a famous person once stopped to help, but that ordinary people keep choosing to help each other, day after day, in ways no camera will ever capture, because in the end, it's not about who you are, it's about what you do when you see someone struggling, and whether you're willing to say simply, "Are you okay?" And sometimes that's enough to change a life.